Hey guys, and welcome back to another episode of the Renaissance Rule podcast. And one thing about me, I am going to make great use of my time. It is a bit of a rainstorm where I am, and you would be surprised to know that I'm in a very unconventional location. However, I thought since I'm a little encumbered at this time, why not just go ahead and make a podcast and make use of my time? So I was going to go live, but I chose not to do that because I don't really go live these days anymore. Not as often as I probably should or like or whatever. Anyway, you will hear some noise in the background. So, just bear with me. Okay. Hopefully in this little space, right, it's not too bad. I want to talk about a few things. First, I want to talk a little bit about compassion. I think right now, a lot of people are like, oh, we need to be more compassionate. We need to be more compassionate, things like that. I think people are getting a sense of an awareness of what is going on within the communities and what is going on within the lives of individuals who are disenfranchised around them. And I don't want to say white people are getting that awareness. I think people in general, but I will say just a little bit, because I think, in all of the advocacy work, homelessness has always been an issue within American society, right? It's always been an issue within our country. People not having money for food and groceries and things like that, right? Food scarcity, ironically, has always been an issue. And so I don't want to make it seem like this is just something new, but I do think for the first time, it was starting to impact the white middle class in a way that I think it has never before. And so I think that now what starts to be a revelation, which is very common when you start talking about white Americans, whenever they get wind of something for the first time, despite ignoring it for years or turning a blind eye or just simply being disinterested, it becomes a revelation. So it's not really a revelation. This has been going on for some time now. But we were living in a day and age, more specifically, right, under this current administration, where it is true, right? Corporations, CEOs, CFOs, all right. And they were making a lot more money from these organizations than it would allow. But I think that that's also been that's been pretty consistent within our society as well, right? Manufacturers began to close because of automation. People lost jobs. Hello, Willy Wonka, right? And so it's like, this is the American way in regards to businesses and how they function and how they sustain and how they grow and how they generate revenue. And then they want to go on to stocks and all these different things in terms of investments. And so it's always been there. However, you guys, by the great majority, voted in for a president who just blatantly doesn't care about your humanity, doesn't care about the humanity of other people who don't look like you, right? Not just Black people, but Hispanics, right? We're seeing the rise in the just mere incarceration flat out, right, in regards to Hispanics. And because of really just the legion, right? And this parasitic, almost like infectious, white supremacist culture, a lot of Hispanics also voted for Donald Trump against their own best interests. This man was very blatantly on CNN, on any, news broadcasting, just very bold and very bodacious in saying that, hey, I'm going to deport all of you. I'm going to send as many of you back as I can. And you guys were standing there with your Trump hats and you were standing there at the rallies and you were showing up to the conservative rallies and you were in massive support of this because you thought that when Trump spoke about the rich and the wealthy and tax breaks, that you would be a part of that, despite never being Trump's peer, not just merely by race and ethnicity, but in tax brackets, right? And in childhood upbringing. Trump does not have an American story. Trump has an American dream, quite frankly, which in that myopic sort of like way of living and being, you don't really see marginalized groups, right? That's the thing about privilege. You don't see it. You don't recognize it. Then you couple that with him being a white man. Honey, you just get a disaster. That's why he does what he does. He says what he wants. And he's really created a culture and society where other people can do the same. And so are we growing less compassionate towards those who are unhoused? The answer is no. And I say that because even when it looked like I got it, I ain't got it. You know what I mean? Like, I'm saying that as a collective, like, it may appear that you have more than the next person, but it's like, yeah, you have a car, but you can't afford the car note, right? Like, you're struggling to make the payments. And so a lot of people are like, we need to just be more compassionate towards one another. We need to give. I think we're at a point where I don't know too much about the economy, not outside of recession. And I'm more so talking about in terms of the US dollar, but I just feel as though the value of the dollar is crippling. I feel as though, you know what I mean? I don't know if that's true, but I feel as though it means nothing. nothing. So if I were to give an unhoused person $20, that is going to do nothing, right? That quite literally is not going to do anything. And as I was reading Martin Luther King Jr.'s book, Strength to Love, he spoke about how, there's altruism and then there's like excessive altruism. And he started talking about how people could essentially give and go above and beyond, and I realized that I think in terms of our altruistic, right, philanthropic efforts today, I think it's better to do for people than to give money. Because for whatever reason, okay, the US dollar within American society today, as it stands in 2026 on July 17th, it means absolutely nothing, honey. Matter of fact, you can't get anything for $1. I don't even know if Arizona, right, the infamous drink, okay, Arizona, I don't even know if Arizonas are even $1 anymore. Like nothing costs $1. You can't get anything with $1, right? A decent meal is going to cost you about $24. So it's actually not going to be $20, it's going to be $24. And so if you were to say, give this person, like, it's not going to be enough. It's more so what I'm saying, right? It's just not going to be enough because of the time in which we're living in. And so very, very, very crazy, tumultuous, and difficult times. And I think that goes for everybody, right? Some people are living on credit. People made certain lifestyle choices post-COVID. And now we have this huge, huge rise in a lifestyle creep, and no one can afford it. People are getting divorced. People are frustrated. People aren't really moving forward. Those who are already highly educated have hit their mark. Honey, where else do you go from a PhD, right, to try to better your income and follow this path of somewhat like enlightenment that is supposed to lead, to economic security? It's just not there no more. There ain't no path. You know what I mean? You got people who want to push businesses, but the thing is with small businesses is that you have to market to people who are around you. And the reality is that, the purchasing power just is not there, right? Yes, we give to the community. Yes, we support in that way, but we ain't really buying what we don't need like that. You know what I mean? Like, yeah, I could buy that, but I also need to buy this and I got to make sure I've got this and that. You know what I mean? So it's like, and I don't know, maybe it's a bit of projection, but I do think to some level, the prioritization in terms of what we support, it's different now. And I do think those who are struggling with homelessness and things like that, right? I know I'm using the terms interchangeably. I think today for the monitor, we're saying unhoused. I'm not sure. It's different. And I think it's a very troubling thing. And I think for so many of us, back to my point about compassion, I don't think that we are compassionate. I think that so many of us are helpless. You got the media who's constantly slamming us with, right? First of all, you got Donald Trump who's constantly, creating a culture of apartheid, right? Like bringing it forward, just full circle. He's like, hey, here's a caste system. Y'all need to follow it. This is what it is. He's calling people monkeys. He's doing what it is that he wants to do. And I don't know why, but for whatever reason, we think that leadership doesn't have an impact on us. And so I say all that to say, when you have a leader who is very forthcoming in regards to division, people aren't probably going to be, interwoven in that way, right? They're not going to be locked in, to really band together to do anything. In addition to that, I think you have that. And then I don't know. I just think you're constantly being pushed and bombarded with images of all this crazy stuff coming on, which brings me to my next point about true crime, and I don't want to veer too far left, but I'm saying all of that to say, I think our awareness of criminality, our awareness of people who are dealing with some type of like neuroses and neurotic issues and things like that, it's very, very, very much doubled and crippled. And so we don't necessarily feel safe enough. Right. And so, Martin Luther King Jr. was talking about this in his book, like, people may not give because they don't feel safe and they are afraid, especially of what they've seen on the media, right? If you see that the black kid is a killer or whatever, then you're not going to want to stop and help. And so I think that is increasing, though, by the majority, because you don't know, right? You don't know. And I do think when people are at their wits and there really isn't anything to lose, I absolutely think that there will be crime, right? Not because I think people want to go to jail, but I just think it's like if you've lost everything and nothing is getting better, the price is going up every single day. Some people might feel like they have nothing to live for, right? And so I don't want to project fear. We want to talk faith. We want to speak life. We also want to talk about the humanity. I think there are also a lot of people who simultaneously are banding together. They're choosing to stay within their families. They're choosing to work together as, husband and wife and so forth. And so, yeah, I mean, it's kind of giving like survival of the fittest. And I don't think that under these restraints, right? I don't think that really fosters community, right? That doesn't really foster community. That doesn't really make people want to go out and be altruistic, right? Because giving the little that you do have is great, right? And even what you can give is quite literally not enough. And so it's a very sad thing. And I think what happens, especially under this administration, we've kind of normalized demanding more from the poor, which has always been there, right? We always demand more from the poor, but there's this growing awareness of demanding more from the poor versus everybody coming together and demanding more of the people who can actually make a difference and make a change, right? Why do we have to come together to put our resources together, which is not much, but of course, we can be mighty in number, especially if you were to get a few people, right? But like, are we really going to be able to build housing and things like that? Yes, potentially, but why don't we use those concerted efforts to reach, millionaires that are in our parasocial relationships via online, right? Like, why don't we use our platforms to advocate for those things? In that regard, I don't know. Like, I'm not necessarily saying I have the solutions, but I'm also saying that I think we're doubling down on people who don't have it though, right? Like, you may not have it, but like, they don't have it either. You know what I mean? Like, people out here on CC credit card, they pay a $25 a month on a $44,000 credit card balance. You know what I mean? Like, it's real like that. Do I think that's everybody? No, of course not. But I do think for the most part, people are genuinely trying to get by. So that's a tough thing, right? That's a tough thing. And, it's not a lack of compassion. I think in one, it's like, because people just feel so hopeless. It's like, what do we do? Right? There was a point in time where you can give $20, you can get, you know what I mean? It would make a difference. But it's to the point where, there is no housing, right? For some people. So it's like, what do you do in that case? Right? So that's one thing. And I'll end there. I don't have the solution, but I definitely wanted to bring a sense of awareness, So the other thing I wanted to talk about is the growing love and the increase in true crime. Now, I don't know if you guys know this or not, but we actually have the power to use our voices, to use our platforms, to bring awareness to certain things. And in doing so, especially when you're talking about something so delicate like exonerations and people being incarcerated because they committed a crime against another person, right? They took a life. You have to be very careful with that. I was reading up on the Anad Said or whatever, and just reading the story about the young man and the young woman. And I couldn't believe that the case was essentially dismissed and it was brought back to life and retried in 2025 because of a podcaster. Can you believe that? Yeah, a podcaster essentially reopened the case by the growing awareness that she created around the case on her podcast because of her love for true crime. And I question what is going on with that, right? I was looking at the demographic of people who like true crime, and the numbers were kind of neck and neck between black and white. There were more white women that liked true crime. There were women who had some college, a lot who didn't. And there were also women who did have post-secondary education. So I don't really know like what it is with people in true crime, but like we have the power as people to bring certain things to light. And so essentially with this case, this young man took the life of his young girlfriend, and they got a confession from a witness and all these different things. He was fighting it, of course. And because of this podcaster bringing it back to light, 2025, it was then retried and it was dismissed, really just because he was constantly fighting for years and years. And it got to the point where it was like, hey, listen, you'd have been fighting for this for so long. We're going to just go ahead and dismiss it. We have no, he did serve some time, but eventually was, and I'm just like, reading that, and I hope I'm paraphrasing correctly, but I just was reading that and I just was thinking about like the level of insensitivity we have in regards to horrible things that happen to people, right? Like I never really understood it. Like I remember like back in the day, I had someone in my life that would watch, I ain't gonna really, I don't want to say too much, but like, was watching Force 48, and I remember seeing like cold bodies grayed out. I'm like, whoa, this is crazy. You know what I mean? And I never really liked stuff like that. I don't really like horror movies. I think growing up as a young girl, as a teenager, you kind of just do whatever is, in front of you. And maybe, I've seen some scary movies, but like fast forward today, and it's like, I don't know, the obsession with like violence and the obsession with like these gruesome acts of like, you know what I mean? I don't really know what that is, but I do want to kind of just bring awareness to anybody who's so obsessed with that. It's like, I know you like novelty. I know you like mystery, right? And I don't want to tell you what to do because I can't tell you what to do, but I do think to some level, to some degree, right, psychologically, I don't think that we're okay. I don't think that this type of content, I don't think that that is very edifying. And I'll leave it there because I don't want to tell you what to do with your life. Okay. The other thing I wanted to kind of touch on was conversations about deconstruction from Christians. Okay. And I think in part, a lot of the just really go hard Christians are people who grew up in the church, right? Never really had to kind of deal with a lot of like the grief that I think a lot of Christians carry. And people carry from being abused or betrayed, right? Given religion. And I can tell because it's like, on one hand, they don't, and I don't want to make this about privilege because y'all, I'm not going to lie. We're doing this thing now where we like to discredit a lot of people. And I'm not trying to do that. Like everybody has a testimony. Everybody has their own story. Everybody has their own walk, right? And I'm not going to say people's faith ain't real. I think, to be honest, I think if your life in terms of basic needs being met, I think not always. And I'm using this very lightly. I'm saying this very lightly because there's a lot of nuance here. I don't think I'm going to have time to hit every little thing because that's going to be annoying. And this is going to be like another 30 minutes. But I do think to some degree, like a lot of Christians who got married early, for example, right? So you got psychological, you got physiological needs being met, you got a sense of belonging, right? All these things, you never really had to navigate dating culture. You never really had to navigate, like, you just really have to do certain things. You can have certain experiences. I think if people say it's arrested development, I don't necessarily think it's that per se, but I will say that getting married early sometimes, right? Growing up in the church early, these experiences shape your life in such a way that it almost like it's kind of enclosed, right? You start to you kind of have a sense of safety, right? And so you may have made mistakes and you have your own choices. As I said, we all have our own testimony. But I think when you hear the cries of people who are in church and who are in ministries and who are giving and showing up every single day, and they're telling you, statistics are telling you, people online are telling you that, hey, listen, churches oftentimes prioritize, right, getting money, okay, than keeping the sheep safe. All right, then leading the flock, okay, then shepherding God's children, okay. That is then not for you to say or to be insensitive and be like, well, no, I just think it's this, and people aren't reading their Bibles, and people, no, that's not how that's gonna go, right? And so the reason why I think that for many churches, like, and I don't know, I said this on a YouTube short, but like, I feel like for a lot of people who go into ministry, I personally don't know what type of narcissism a person would have to say, I hear from God. I want to lead God's people. I want to go in ministry. Let me just say that first and foremost, right? I think that is an incredibly high calling. I'd be looking at the Pope. I'm like, I know that man is every way which wicked. All right. Because to me, I just feel like to associate yourself with a divinity is crazy. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know what, like in my mind, I would never want to be the spokesperson for God. I would never want to do that. Never. And if I'm going to tell you about my faith, it's going to be about my faith. It's going to be about, this is me coming live, okay, reporting live to you. I'm never going to be like, hey, listen, this is such and such hearing from the gates of heaven. Honey, never. I don't even know what type of time. I don't know. But some people, hey, maybe it's real. Maybe it works. I don't know. But I will say this, I feel as though in my affiliation, because I have a church, right? In my affiliation with church, I got to prioritize relationship, right? So let me just answer this and just provide a little bit of feedback for anybody out there who's dealing with this and who's in this tough space and you feel misunderstood. I got to prioritize relationship first and foremost. I didn't say nothing about lifestyle. You live how you do what you want to do. But I'm telling you, I got to prioritize relationship. I got to prioritize relationship. I have to prioritize my relationship with God, because before Instagram, before the growing rise in ministries, before the kickbacks with the taxes, all these different things, I was in my faith and the Lord met me where I was and he carried me all the way here. Okay. And so, like, I just want to encourage you guys, if you are in that space and you don't know and you feel like you can't trust nobody and you feel like people have betrayed you and you feel like such and such behavior is excused because such and such plays the drums or such and such is, in the ministry and they sing and they need a singer on set, whatever reason your church justifies somebody hurting you, whether they want to play neutral, like Jesus was not neutral. And what I don't understand about people too, like a lot of Christians and people just in general, if we know that the Lord talks about enemies, if we know that he specifies that he has children, if we know that he says many are called, few are chosen, why do we act like everybody is a child of God? I don't really understand that. He said, who are the children of God? Those who do the work of my Father. Scheming, lying, deceiving, beating, misleading, abusing. That is the work of the devil. So if you do the work of the devil and it is brought to the congregation's attention, most importantly, the pastor who supposedly is supposed to hear from the Lord Jesus Christ himself, why are we giving pass for the abusers? Is the church so afraid to say, you can't come here no more? You can't work here no more. Like, I think it's time to stand up and do something noble. And I think if you want to play neutral, you want to be the neutralizer without any type of psychology degree in regards to conflict resolution, then I don't really know if this is for you, because I personally think that we have to make hard decisions sometimes, and we got to call the shots. And we ain't got to say, hey, listen, you ain't gonna never show up in this church again, or you ain't gonna, God don't love you. We ain't gonna do all that. We just got to say, hey, listen, brother. Hey, listen, sister, which is rare if I'm being honest. We're gonna need you to resign. I'm gonna need you to resign. I'm gonna need you to pack it up. What you did was unacceptable. We don't stand for that. And it's like, that just never seems to happen. And so when people are telling you guys that these are the experiences they're having in ministry and you guys want to shoo, all I can think about is the only reason somebody could be so insensitive to the prevalence of this type of behavior, right? This type of spiritual violence, if you will, is because you've never experienced it. And you probably are still going hard and telling the abusers and the abused to kind of get over it, and that their faith isn't weak, or they don't understand trials and tribulations, because you ain't never had the trial. You never had to go through the trial. You never experienced that. You ain't never been deceived by somebody in church who blatantly and just willfully just come into your life and alter. You ain't never experienced that. So that's why you talking in a way that's very insensitive. You're also, so I don't know. I don't get it. And I think another thing I don't really get with like churches and the excuse for like just bringing people in and the drums and the music is like, why does all this matter? You know what I mean? It really don't matter. Like, I feel like we can put on some music on YouTube and we can get right to it. Hook up the aux, Spotify, no ads. You know what I mean? We don't need all this. That's nothing, right? As somebody who, in the budget, if I was an accountant with these churches, cut all this. That's the problem right there. Cut all this. You don't need all of that. You don't need all that. We can all sing together. Everybody stand up and give praise to the Lord. We got YouTube instrumentals. We don't need all this. Why are we paying such and such? That's half the budget. People ain't tithing and giving no way. You trying to figure out where to make cuts. It needs to be to these musicians. This is not a concert. This is not a concert. We can't afford to pay all these people. We got some people who want to volunteer. Praise the Lord. That's what the church should be about anyway. Since when did it even become that? Why are we hiring people who don't do the will of God, who are not living in alignment with Christ, who don't even want to be in alignment with Christ? We're hiring them. They're not even a part of the church. We're paying them out of our budget for what? And we know he's an abuser. We know such and such ain't living right. Why are we doing it? Why are we doing that? Is just dumb. That is dumb. So I think really it needs to be reprioritization. And I think for many people who ain't never been abused, who ain't never went through this type of spiritual neglect and just all of that, you got to realize you got some blind spots. You got some blind spots. I'm not saying you ain't never had no experience. But I'm saying when I'm listening to the cries of the people, I know for a fact that this is going on and y'all not doing nothing about it. You see what I'm saying? And furthermore, listen here. I don't know what God has for me, but when I think about the accounting in the church, I really want to know, where is the money going? Right? It is an organization, right? It's a body of Christ, an organization. Resources should absolutely be going out, right? We got to keep the lights on. We got to, okay, fair. We got to help out certain families. Okay, fair. But we got to figure out what needs are we meeting before we even open up this institution. Like any other business, we're not going to open up this institution because we want to hoot and holler and throw a concert. We're not going to open up this institution because we want a platform. Because if you want to be platformed in the name of the Lord, you can get on YouTube, start your own page. What you're not going to do is bring all these people in here and be hustling. You ain't finna do that. You know what I mean? So why are we opening up a church in the first place, right? What are our intentions? What mission do we serve? Do we help little boys and girls? Do we help mothers? Do we help those who are struggling with addiction? What exactly is our purpose? Because it can't just be, we are a ministry. That can't be it. That's not enough. This is a business at the end of the day. And y'all run it like that behind closed doors, right? You're running it like that when everybody, you know what I mean? So it's like, what exactly per se. What exactly is, and I don't want to come off as critical, right? I'm coming off as somebody who has had a unique path and a unique, a different set of skills and experiences, right? Do we really have something to say? Do we really want to live for God and be persecuted? And do we really want to stand for something? Do we really want to tell people, hey, straight up, you're doing this and that to your wife, you're abusing your wife, you can't come here no more, right? Do we want to stand for something, or do we just want to be a building with all these taxes and expenses because we got to keep the lights on? You see what I'm saying? So it's like, before you even get into ministry, that needs to be first and foremost. What exactly are we doing this for, right? Because at the end of the day, if we're not here to serve, if we're not here to help, if we're not here to give, what exactly are we doing? We're spending way too much money on music and all that anyway. That don't even make no sense to me. We need to be focused. Let the first half of the service be Bible study. People ain't reading their Bibles anyway. You need to command that people come here with the Bible open. That need to be the first half. That need to be the first half. Keep the instrumentals rolling on YouTube, aux cord, okay? Keep the Bibles rolling. Get the Bibles open. That need to be the first half. Then we need to have a sermon. We need to cut out worship. We need to cut it in half. We need to cut it in half, and we need to make some adjustments. If people can sing, come on, volunteer, praise the Lord. This is what it's about. It's about coming together, using your gift, right? Nobody tell you this is the only thing you do is you want to sing. Okay, I don't know if God said that. He might say you might need a job. You know what I mean? He might have said you might need a job. That's probably what he said. I don't know if he said this is the only thing you're gonna be able to do. But I don't know if he said that. That's not what he meant when he said use your gifts. That's not what he meant. I don't think that's what he meant. That's what I'm saying. So we do have to deconstruct because there's a lack of understanding, first and foremost. Okay. And I don't want to be too hard on anybody because I think ministry is important. I think community is important. I think for me, it's more so about the community aspect. It's about the belonging. And most importantly, it's about my relationship to my faith, period. I mean, I have to keep in mind, church, people are people, straight up. So you got to do things unto the Lord, first and foremost, but I think the way people run their churches today, I don't think it's about being critical because I feel like, how can I critique a pastor when I've not been a pastor? I don't know what they deal with, right? I don't want to take away from that. I can't critique a church when you know what I mean? I don't have a church. That's not my, you know what I mean? But I'm saying church in terms of that's not my business, right? So I can't be too critical, but at the same time, though, you know what I mean? I think many of us can acknowledge that there have been some shortcomings, and why y'all not willing to listen, I don't know. I don't know why we're not listening to the fact that at this point, thousands, probably hundreds and thousands, and for decades now, have been talking about the ills of the church, and you guys aren't doing anything about it. So people are people at the end of the day, but if that's going to be the philosophy, then we got to step down. We got to say, hey, this is a place of worship. We got to stop saying, hey, this is who we're going to reverend. This is who we're going to bishop. This is who we're going to put in position. If we're not going to be leaders and be willing to do what's right, you know what I mean? And be willing to stand for something. Jesus wasn't just all over willy-nilly with everybody. I don't understand that. If he said he flipping tables, why are you not flipping tables? Why are we still just allowing certain things? You know what I mean? So I just think at the end of the day, it's not everybody. Yeah, repentance, forgiveness, all of that is real. We make mistakes. I'm not saying come down on people, be hard on people. No, use your discernment, be wise. We got to understand people are people. People are learning, people are growing. We got to have mercy, we got to have grace, but that does get to a certain point. We have to get people removed. We have to dust our feet with people. We have to say, hey, listen, you can't come to this congregation anymore. God bless you. Okay. Praying for you. Okay. But we have to learn to stand for something. And the fact that you guys want to keep turning the blind eye, it's like you're turning the sheep loose. And if you're going to turn the sheep loose, then I don't know if you are a shepherd. So you start talking about, the blind leading, you know what I mean? Like, are you the shepherd? I don't know if you're the shepherd. The Lord is the shepherd, most importantly. But if you're going to stand here and sit in front of me every day and talk to me and talk at me, then there has to be some level of accountability. So I think that we deconstruct in order to reconstruct, right? But most of all, the priority will and forever be relationship. Okay, so if you feel like you've been in church for a minute, you need a little breaky break, you might need a little breaky break, right? For real, because you might need to hear from God. You might need to take some time and figure out who you are. Church can have a way of creating a very legalistic, ritualistic type of behavior and attitude. So that way, when you see the world, you don't even know how to engage with people. That's why some Christians are so secluded and so mean and so heartless, because they didn't have to suppress so much of themselves, right? To be within a congregation. They had to repress so many of their desires, right? Because of false teaching, right? When God says, I'm actually going to give you the desires of your heart, right? Obviously, if those things are in alignment with my will, right? Love, kindness, good, and I'm not going to say that's his will. I'm just saying, you know what I mean? He didn't say suppress all your desires, go crazy, be mad. You know what I mean? Just be angry, you know what I mean? Because I think that's what creates the monster in people, right? You can't even be yourself. Can you imagine just putting a lid on a really, really hot jar for a very long time? If at some point, yeah, it's going to explode. You know what I mean? So I do think that church in many ways is a conduit for this type of behavior, right? This sort of like, suppressive behavior. But in addition to the suppressive behavior, I think that church can be a conduit to a sort of like manipulative and deceptive type of behavior, right? Why? Well, because it's all about forcing outcomes. It's the belief that if you give, then you're going to receive. When the reality should be, hey, you should give because we're going to be giving to this organization, or we're planning to do this with the church, or we got to keep the lights on, like, you know what I mean? Or if you feeling generous and you want to donate to an organization just like any other organization, then you do that, right? But it shouldn't be a thing of, if you give to me in this organization, despite our failure to shepherd you or whatever, then, like, you know what I mean? Like, that shouldn't be that way. I think that pastors should run their church in a way where everybody feels like they're at home. You know what I mean? Where it's not this hierarchical type of thing, where it's a thing of like, hey, listen, we're here to commune. We love the Lord. We're here to support one another. We're here to help people in the best way that we can. I think they need to be humble. I think they need to say they don't have all the answers. They have grew up in the church their whole life, so they got blind spots. I think there needs to be a level of humility in regards to teaching. Not all, but for some, right, who really ain't consecrated like that, or who just are doing the best they can, right, and just genuinely need to carry themselves with humility, because we all do, right? So I'm not trying to come down on pastors. I believe that church homes and church communities, they should be supported. I believe that we should give unto the Lord. I do believe that a church house can be very healing for a lot of people. You know, a lot of times when you go to church, it just so happens that, Holy Spirit, if you ain't been in a while, right? Holy Spirit be touching on your heart and have a word right for you, right? So I'm all for that. Like, I believe in that. You know what I mean? I believe in coming together. I believe in people having a place of community. It's a lot of people out here who don't have nobody, right? So what a blessing it is to be able to go to church and look forward to seeing people and familiarize yourself with people every week. You know what I mean? That's a blessing. What better way than to commune with other like-minded individuals, right? That's a blessing. That helps you grow in your faith. That helps you to, talk to people who speak your language, right? And carry themselves with your values. But we got to correct. That's the thing. We have to correct. So we don't deconstruct to tear it down and throw it away, right? We don't deconstruct to destroy. We deconstruct so we can reconstruct, because right now we're not operating in a system that is loving. We're not operating in a system that protects people. We saying that we love people, but we know they're going home dealing with abusers and we're not doing nothing about it. We're letting an abuser come the next day, right? We're paying the abuser, whatever. And it's like, no, at the end of the day, we need to say something. We need to say, hey, listen, no, you can't come here, straight up. And I'm not really seeing the pastor do that. If we know that, Trump or whatever, or, I don't want to say Trump, because I don't actually want churches to get into politics per se. Why? Well, I mean, serve the people. I think white churches have a very, very clear understanding about who they're serving. And what I mean by that is white churches and white communities serve the people, and the people serve them. You see the mega churches, how do you think they get them? I mean, they probably get more funding too. So let's take it easy, right? There's some factors there. But by and large, it might be a different structure, right? Different understanding. And so, I don't know, y'all. I don't have all the answers, right? I don't have all the answers. I'm not going to sit up here and act like I got all the answers. But what I am saying is, overall, let's try to hear the cries of the people, right? If you take nothing away from what I said, that's fine. Right? Like I said, I don't want to come down too hard on pastors and stuff like that. Like, I have a church. I think it's commendable. I think, the community, like, all of that is beautiful and is great. But we can't keep ignoring the cries of the people, right? We can't keep ignoring the cries of the people. We can't keep ignoring the fact that women are crying out. We can't keep ignoring the fact that men are struggling with all these type of suppressive addictions and psychotic issues, and they're showing up in the church. Like, we can't keep ignoring that. You know what I mean? We can't keep ignoring the sick. You know what I mean? And if we're claiming that this is a house of healing, we got to do something about it. You know what I mean? We got to do something about it. Maybe the first half of the day, the sermon, the workshop needs to be, we got to bring a psychologist in who might be faith-based, who might be able to talk to some people about some things, get some resources. Maybe we can provide a little funding for some grants so people get help. I don't know, child. But it can't be, we got to sit here and do nothing and keep showing up like this is the 50s and 60s where people really go out and organize. Like, no, people are coming to you. We got to do something. You know what I mean? Let's use these resources. Let's have a plan that people really want to contribute to. So, at the end of the day, it is a house of God, but we can't be secretive about our finances. We can't be secretive about the accounting aspects. We can't be secretive about where the resources are going, because it needs to serve the people. And I think, you you wouldn't have a problem financially if you could open up the discussion a little bit and start talking about those things. And in addition to those who are my riders for Christ and the Bible and all that, got married early, straight through. I don't think you realize the safety net that has shielded you from the world, in many ways, right? Not everybody who grew up in the church was abused. A lot of people who grew up in the church, like I said, either married. So there's a level of safety that comes with marriage. I know right now, and forever, it's always had a very bad rep, but there is a level of safety, right, that comes with marriage. And those who, grew up in the church and maybe you're a man, right? You've always kind of been esteemed within that institution, right? Quite literally. We talk about fornication, it's geared towards women, right? There is no conversations about fornication and all of that towards men. It's just not, right? We say, you're the harlot, you're the Jezebel, right? It never talks about the man with the sweet tongue and you know what I mean? When I say sweet tongue, I mean charming, right? Deceptive, right? Knows how to talk to women and be sly and be cute. You know what I mean? We don't deal with that, right? So it's like, if you're a man, you grew up in the church and you're going to have a different understanding as well. And so stop ignoring the cries of the people. I think that's more so what I'm saying. If, you really want to be for God, right? How you going to ignore the cries of his people? Like, I don't understand that. You can't sit here and keep turning a blind eye saying, oh, it's not every church. Yeah, it may not be every church, but it's a whole lot of them, right? Why? Because when people create an organization, okay, I'm about to wrap up. When people create an organization such as a church, that's very synonymous with the previous model, right? So it really just get this replica. Everybody's doing what the next church is doing. And if they're not doing that, then they're doing everything like megachurch, right? Where they are upholding racism and everything else. So, the conversations run deep and they can go forever. But I think most importantly, my main message, all right, and I'm about to go because I got to go. Don't ignore the cries of God's people. I don't stand for that. I don't believe that's what God wants. And I think if that's how you're moving, I think you're very dishonest. And I don't know who told you to do this. You need to check your heart, check yourself, and ask yourself, why am I in this position? Right? I don't know. Like I said, I think to some degree, we all should be sharing our thoughts at churches. If I open up a church, we all gonna be up here. We all gonna be on the mic today. What you got to say? What happened? What was the blessing in your life this week? What you learned this week? Okay. How did God come through in relationship and prayer for you? Big, small, and everything in between. You know what I mean? Like we all gonna be up on the mic talking. Okay. We're gonna be organizing. We're gonna be out in the community doing stuff. Honey, this is the such and such ministry, and this is what we finna do. This is where your money goes. This is what's up. You know what I mean? If you give, you here, you want to be here. We accept volunteers, all that money, it's going out. You know what I mean? If I take anything, you will see what I'm taking. Do we agree? Do we not agree? Okay. Run it like a nonprofit. Do we agree that this is the president's salary? You know what I mean? I don't know. But I know in the Bible, God talks about that, right? Like, men of God being able to, be provided for when they're preaching his word, right? It's a very noble thing. And it's also a very, it's a big sacrifice, right? We know that. So I don't know, a lot of different contradictions. And I think a lot of it is because of we're oftentimes we're dealing with the Old Testament. We're oftentimes dealing with an ancient text, right? And if it's not the Old Testament, if it's a New Testament, we're dealing with an ancient text and nobody has read it through to through, cover to cover. And if they have, everybody's experiences, their upbringing, how they're, socialized in the world, it all plays a role in how they see Christ. And this is why God said, you will no longer live by the law, but I will put my spirit in you. And this is why he commands us to live by spirit and by truth, right? This is why he commands us, to be in relationship with him, because my relationship with him is not going to be your relationship with him. Why? Because the way you grew up, the way you were socialized, the way you came into Christ and his introduction to you is not going to be the same as mine. It might have some similar parts. All right. He's a loving God. I think that because he is the truth and the way in the life, that's going to be pretty consistent. Right. But right. His ways are consistent. Right. But he knows how to deal with you and he knows how to deal with me. And so that's what I would do. There you go. That's what I would do. Period. And I bet you them church numbers be up. And we find out such and such doing this and to their wife. Oh, you got to go, brother. You can't stay up here. We find such and such wife out here want to be doing what she do. She's scheming. Girl, you can't come here no more. Girl, you can't. The babies can still come, girl, but you can't come here no more. Right. But we know more often than not, unfortunately, let's be honest, it's not really women. Women typically are indoctrinated in such a way and socialized in such a way in the church that, abuse really has no role to take in our lives, right? That level of subservience for most women is innate anyway. And so you have a culture that really encourages that breeds that. And so, I'm not going to say it never happens, but, for real, it is a lot of men who are taking advantage of the women in church. And so that's what I would do. That's my thoughts. You guys have a wonderful weekend. Peace.